Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brittany Bodane, and I'm Golden Software's webinar coordinator, as well as a member of our technical support team. I'm excited to be here today to give you an intro to mapping XYZ data in Surfer. After the discussion of each topic, I will stop for a few minutes to answer any questions. You can send your questions to Drew, the webinar host, via the questions box at any time. The questions box is on the webinar control panel underneath the audio section. Type in your question and it will be sent to the webinar host, who will either answer it or forward it to me. Please feel free to send in all questions. If we don't have time to answer them during the webinar, we will answer them via email once the webinar is completed. This webinar is also being recorded. Later this week, we'll post a recording along with the data used in this webinar, and I'll send each of you a link when it's posted so you can test these examples out for yourself. Today, we will specifically be covering how to QC data files in Surfer's worksheet, create multiple map layers with Surfer's map wizard, interpolate data to create a raster grid, and visualize vector and raster data in Surfer's 3D view. So we'll go ahead and get started. First, we'll talk about QCing our data. It's useful to open your data file in Surfer's worksheet if you want to QC the file for errors, edit existing data entries, add new data entries, sort the data, change the coordinate system of the data, or really any other form of data editing. To open a data file in Surfer, click File, Open. We'll select the data file and we'll click Open. And you might notice that this is an Excel file. Surfer supports many file formats for text files, including Excel file formats. So I'll click Open. And this file will open in Surfer's worksheet for us. One of the ways to QC data is to calculate statistics on the columns. So I can select columns B and C, which contain our latitude and longitude coordinates. And I can click Data, Data, Statistics. In the Statistics dialog, we have a lot of options. For our purposes today, I'm really just interested in the minimum and maximum, so I'll go ahead and uncheck these other options in here. And really, I'm just trying to check my coordinates for accuracy. If the minimum and maximum aren't what I'm expecting, I can immediately tell there's some sort of typo in my data. So the other options down here, we can choose to show our results in a window, or we could copy it to a worksheet. I'll have my mine paste into the worksheet starting in cell F1. Surfer will overwrite data if I choose a cell where there is already data, which I don't want. And I'll click OK. So here we can see that the minimum and maximum for my longitude and latitude are about the same. And if you've worked with longitude and latitude data ever, you'd know that that's it gives you a good idea something's wrong. What we're looking at here is a list of all of the cities in Colorado. So my minimum and maximum, my longitudes should all be in the negative low 100s, and my latitudes should all be in the high 30s, low 40s. So we can find which point is incorrect by sorting our data. So first I'll delete this data, gotten what I need out of it. And now I will go ahead and select everything in the worksheet. And I can do that by clicking this cell in the top, or button rather than cell, in the top left corner of the worksheet. As soon as I click that, everything is selected. To sort the data, I'll click Data, Data, Sort. And we'll sort first by our longitude, which is column B, and next by the latitude in column C. I know that because the I know that the longitude is what's wrong here, so I want to sort it on descending, so the highest value is first, and I'll leave column C set to ascending. And sorting, this is going to be like if you were working in Excel and you had a table and you sorted. Excel doesn't jumble all of your coordinates. It'll keep everything lined up as it should. So I'll click OK. And here we can see at the very top, I've just simply switched my latitude and longitude coordinates for Fort Lupton. So I can go ahead and just swap these back. I'll do this, I prefer hotkeys, so I'll use Control X to cut this value, and I'll just paste it over here for a minute, and I'll press Control X and Control V to paste, and one more time here. So now my coordinates are put where they should be. If there were multiple that were wrong, we'd see them listed up top here. But just to be certain, I can even scroll all the way down to the bottom of my data and make sure that everything is still looking as I would expect. Some other options for working in the worksheet are so I have all the cities from Colorado here, but let's say I have some other states I'm interested in working in, but I received all of my data in a separate spreadsheet for each state, and I'd rather work with all of my data in one. I can easily merge other worksheets into this worksheet by clicking in the cell where I'd like it to land, so presumably at the bottom of this one. And then I can use the data edit merge command, and that'll just insert those values starting in the cell that my mouse is clicked in. So if I were going to do that, I would also most likely want a column that includes what state my cities are in. So that's very easy to do as well. I can start by giving my column a header here. And instead of typing in this for each state, I can actually use the transform tool. So this is in data, transform. And this allows you to apply mathematical transforms to columns. So we can actually, with this tool, enter in mathematical equations if we wanted to do any math on our population or anything like that. For this example, we are just going to fill these cells in with some text. So we can do that by starting with the column we want the data to be populated in, which is F, so F equals. And then because we're working with text, I need quotes. If I were working with numeric values, if maybe I wanted to fill this entire column with zeros or something like that, I wouldn't need quotes. That's just for text. And the next thing I need to do is change my first row to 2 so we don't overwrite state with CO. And then the rest of my options are perfect. You might also notice that even though this column is completely empty, Surfer is smart enough to know that I don't want to fill this column to infinity with CO. I only want it to fill to the end of my data, and that is the last row the rest of these columns have data to. So I'll click OK. And now we have this filled out completely. Now that I'm done QCing my data and making my edits, I can go ahead and save my file. There are quite a few ways we can save in Surfer. First, of course, is file save. If I just click this, it'll save my worksheet as is. It'll still be in the XLSX format. So after I saved it, I could open it in Excel and I would see everything that I just did in Surfer. I could use save as to change the file format or give it a new name. Or an alternative to just using save is to actually right-click over this tab and click save. And when I do that, you'll notice the asterisk went away, showing that there aren't any unsaved changes in the file. All right, next we're going to take a look at creating a map with this data. But first, do we have any questions about QCing data or Surfer's worksheet? We have a question. Thanks for sending that in. If I already have a map created, will the map automatically update as I make changes in the worksheet? No, Surfer will not automatically update as you make changes in the worksheet, but if we had created a map already, and I made these changes here, or even if I had made changes to the worksheet in Excel instead of Surfer, all I'd need to do is click File, Reload Map Data, or if it was just the single layer in the map, I'd use Map Reload Data, and that would just reload for me. And that is true for if I was just using a base or post map. If I had created a grid from this data and I edited the data in this worksheet, I would need to regrid the data in order to have an updated grid. Okay, and that seems like that's it for our questions. So we can just move right along to using Surfer's map wizard. During this section, we will create a grid file and we will create multiple map layers from this worksheet all at once. So Surfer's map wizard is found on the Home tab. In the ribbon, in the wizard section, we can click Map Wizard. First, we need to select our data. By default, Surfer will show us all the files in the sample files, but we also have the option to see our recent files, or if we had set a project location, we could choose that. Because we have our file open, it will be in our recent files. As soon as I select our data file, we can see a preview of it because we have Show Preview checked. You can see it looks just like it did before. And down below is very important. This is where we tell Surfer which of the coordinates we want it to plot. Surfer just assumed that A, B, and C were our X, Y, and Z, but ours are actually in B, C, and D. So I can click in this and just choose. And do note that longitude is always X and latitude is always Y. Our tech support team gets questions about that often, of confusion of why the map is flipped. And our Z, of course, is our population. So I'll click Next. And in the Select Your Map Type dialog, we have the option to create a new map. If we already had created a map, we would have the option to add layers to an existing map. We would like to create a contour map and a post map. So I'll check both of those options and I'll click Next. The next page we come to is the Select Gridding Parameters page. We'd only see this page if we're using a grid-based map type. So for example, if I go back and I remove contour from our selection, so we just have post map selected, this button is now Finish instead of Next because the post map doesn't require a grid file. So I'll check contour and I'll click Next. And now we're back to our Select Gridding Parameters page. This page also has a preview of what the grid will roughly look like. This isn't a contour map, it's a color relief map, but still gives you a good idea of what that data is going to look like. If you're familiar with Surfer, you're probably wondering where some of the simple options went in this dialog. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Here we have some very basic gridding options. We can choose our gridding method. Here in this Copy Geometry From section, we could choose another grid that we've already created and copy its geometry, which would immediately apply the other grid's X and Y minimum, maximum, spacing, number of nodes. That's something you might want to do if you're using grid math or any of the tools that require the grids to be the same size. It's a great way to just make sure your grids are the same size right off the bat. Below, we have the option to assign node data outside the convex hull of data. If I go ahead and check this, our preview will update. And what we're seeing here is there's now a lot more black around the edge. And that's the area that would be assigned node data. And what this means and how you can picture this for your own data set is if you hammered nails into a wooden board about halfway and then wrapped a rubber band around those nails, that would be the convex hull of the data. So this is a good, neat trick if you don't want your data to extrapolate past the area where your data has been collected. So I'll uncheck that. Now, if we want some more options, such as on the standard grid data dialog, which is this tool that we see up here in the ribbon, there would be a lot more options, such as the ability to limit RZ. So let's take a look at those. We can access all of the options for gridding by clicking the Advanced Gridding Parameters and then the Advanced Gridding Parameters button. So this opens up the exact dialog you would see if we had clicked Home, Grid Data in the ribbon. Because we've gone through the map wizard, we don't need to select our columns again. Surfer noticed that for us and put it in there. If we just wanted the simple gridding options, we could click Skip to End and we get to a page that looks similar to this one. But I'll click through the dialog so we can take a look at the options we have here. So the next page we would see is I click Skip to End. The next page we would see is the variogram page. This is a preview of what the modeling would look like. If we made changes in this dialog, we would see all of this update. The next page are the advanced options for kriging specifically, such as the ability to add break lines to your file, search neighborhood, and again, we have a model over on the left that would change so you can see how your search and on all these settings would affect your data. And these red points are, of course, our data points plotted. The next page is the cross-validation page. And again, same thing with the model. If you are interested in these 3 pages that I'm just breezing through, we do have a lot of information on our support portal. So give that a good search. We've got some webinars, training videos, and of course you are welcome to contact support with some specific questions about these pages. So I'll click Next, and this is the page we would get to if we click Skip to End. And as you can see, there are a lot of the same settings here, but a decent amount more on this page. So for example, the grid Z limits, which I mentioned before, we can keep the gridding method from extrapolating our Z, which kriging can do. The other option we're not seeing on the other page is the option to add a node data polygon boundary. And this works similar to the assign node data outside convex hull option, except this is a vector file containing a polygon where you can just choose whether you want Surfer to remove the data inside or out of it. So for example, if I were only interested in the population that exists along the Front Range in Colorado, I could have a polygon that just circles around this. And if I loaded that file into here and did no data outside, my resulting map would only be this area inside of here. And at the bottom here, we have the same option we saw before. We can choose to create a new map or add it to another one. So if we were going to use some of these options and still using the map wizard, I'd recommend unchecking this. We're just going to take a look at our simple options here. So I'll close out of our dialog. And one other thing I wanted to mention here is the spacing and number of nodes is how you control your grid resolution. This is another thing we get a lot of questions about to our support team. If I wanted to increase the resolution of my grid, I would decrease the spacing here or increase my number of nodes. These are tied together. So if I update 1, it will update my spacing. The spacing is always in the units of your data. Our data is in lat long, so these are decimal degrees, not super helpful, but if you're working in UTM or state plane or something, it would be in meters or feet. Surfer, by default, puts 100 nodes across the longest axis, which is our x-axis, and then calculates the shorter spacing based off of the longest side. So now we're ready to create our grid, so I'll click Finish, our grid and both of our map layers. And Surfer has created our maps for us. So one other thing I wanted to point out in this process that I've kind of mentioned is through this, we are creating a grid file. So if I wanted to create another map using that same grid I just created, I don't need to go through the map wizard again or use this grid data tool. I just need to choose a map type and open my grid. So for example, if we wanted to see the grid we just created as a 3D surface, I can click 3D surface. Here's our grid file, exactly where we saved it, and click open. And then we have a nice 3D surface. All right, next we'll talk about editing the properties of our map layers. But before we move on, do we have any questions? Looks like we have a question about gridding methods. Is there a reason that I chose kriging while we were moving through the map wizard? Kriging is the default gridding method because it works pretty well for most data sets. It creates smooth contours, creates a very nice surface. And so that's the default, and that's why I chose it. As far as deciding the best gridding method for your data goes, is a complex question. It completely depends on your data and what output you want to get from it. So if you are wondering if you should or shouldn't be using kriging, I'd recommend searching our support site for an article called Gridding for Non-Geostaticians. It has a little script in there that'll let you input your data and it'll pop out a contour map using every gridding method. And then you can really take a look and compare at how all of those different methods affect your data. All right, looks like that's our only question. Thanks for sending that in. And we'll move on to talk about the properties of our map layers. I'm going to get rid of our 3D surface. Okay. In Surfer, we draw a distinction between map layers and the map frame. The map frame consists of axes and map layers. Properties of the map frame include scale and limit properties. The map layers are each individual map type, and properties of map layers depend on the layer type, but include things like contour interval, presence of labels, fill colors, and anything else that will affect the look of the particular map type. You can have as many layers as you want in each map frame. In this example, we have one map frame, which I've just selected in our contents window. And then we have a post layer and a contours layer. The reason we would want to have these layers in one map frame as opposed to each having their own map frame, like our 3D surface just had, is because when layers aren't in the same map object, they're not spatially tied to each other. When they're in the same map frame, they're spatially tied, meaning they have the same scale, and Surfer is overlaying them by looking at their coordinates. You can have multiple map layers, each with a different coordinate system in one map object. So let's take a look at setting our coordinate system here. Our layers, of course, are going to have the same coordinate system because we created them with the same worksheet. So we don't need to assign coordinate systems to these so that they overlay appropriately, but it will come into play later that we want coordinate systems assigned. So we'll go ahead and take a look at how we do that. So I've selected the contours layer in the contents. And now we can see all of the available properties for it in our properties window. To set a coordinate system, I'll click the coordinate system tab in the properties. And then I'll click this set button. We're working in lat long, so I want World Geodetic System 1984. You might notice I have that saved right here in my favorites because I use it a lot, but I'll show you where it's located in case you wanted to drill down into the coordinate systems here. So we'll find that in predefined. I'll expand geographic lat long, and then they're alphabetical, so I can just scroll down and select the coordinate system and click OK. So you'll notice nothing happened to our map, and that's great. If something had changed on our map, that would mean we chose the wrong coordinate system. It's very important that you choose the coordinate system for your layer that your data is in. If you want your data to be presented in a different coordinate system, then you can assign that to the map object, and we'll get to that later. But the layer always needs to be in the coordinate system it's started in. And that's just because Surfer knows that these are our numbers, but it doesn't know what these numbers are. So now we've told Surfer what these numbers mean. Next, let's take a look at our options for our contours. We can find all of our options to change the properties for the contour lines themselves on the Levels tab. Our data appears to be logarithmically distributed, so we can change our level method from simple to logarithmic. But before we do that, we need to change our minimum contour so it's not a negative number. So I'll just make this, we can make this 0 to make it logarithmic, or for our purposes, we're only interested in cities that have over 1,000 for our population. So I'll press enter and we'll see our map instantly updates. Now that we have valid values to set our level method to logarithmic, I'll click over simple and change it to logarithmic. And again, we can see the map changed quite a bit instantly as I made that change. Next, we can fill our contours and change our color scale. And now we'll add a color scale. Excuse me, my color map is what that's referred to as. And you might notice that we're not seeing the bottom half of our color map. And that's because we've chosen to ignore all of our values below 1,000. I still want to see all of the values though, because this is really not enough difference for me. I'd like the contrast between our values to be a little bit more obvious. So to do that, we'll make some custom edits to our color map. We can do that by clicking this little ellipsis button. It says custom color map when we hover over it. And in here we have plenty of options. Here what we're seeing is the color map over a histogram of our data. We have the option to change our stretch so we could evenly distribute these color nodes throughout the data, which is what it's doing now, or equalize them. As you can see, when I do that, it tries to put more data nodes in where the data is densest. It's going to move back to our rainbow. Down below, though, is what we're really interested here. You can see Surfer checked logarithmic scaling already for us because that's what we set as our level method. But here I'll change our data limits to 1,000 to match the contour map. Then we can go ahead and click apply. And that looks much better to me. I can much more easily see the difference in our contour levels now. So I'll click OK. Now that we can see these colors pretty well. I don't think we need our contour labels, so I can turn off our major contour labels on the Levels tab back in the Properties, in this Major Contours section. Minor contours have their own controls. And next I want to change the line style of our contour lines themselves. So to see this, I just expanded our line properties by clicking on the section. And I can change the style. I'm going to change it to invisible. Then I'm going to do the same thing just below with the minor contour line properties. And now I feel pretty good about my contour map, so we'll move on to looking at some of the properties of the post map. So to see the post map properties, I'll select the post layer in the contents window. The first tab we'll see is the General tab. On the General tab, we could change our columns that are being plotted if we needed to. We can also adjust the number of points shown or the number of rows being used. Or we have the option to connect the points with a line. We'll take a look at changing our symbols. So on the Symbol tab in the Properties window, we could choose a symbol column from our worksheet, and Surfer would just shift through some symbols using the information in the worksheet. We can also expand these symbols properties and choose our own, choose one symbol for each. So I'll go ahead and choose the symbol 31. Can change the line color. Down below, we could change the angle. We could choose to have the sizing proportional, and we can adjust the scaling by clicking Scaling. We can choose a column, so if we wanted to use our population column to size, we could use it. I'll click Cancel. And we can use a column for colors, or we could use a color map. We'll keep ours pretty simple with just the red, but there are plenty options available for making a professional and unique post map. Next, we'll take a look at adding labels. So I've clicked the Labels tab. You can have multiple label sets. By default, we start with just one. So I can change our worksheet column to turn on the labels. If I choose our city column, that's showing me everything listed in that city column of our worksheet. We have a lot of control over where we place the labels, but I still think this number of labels is a little bit overwhelming for us. You might remember from when we were looking at the worksheet, I have a labels column. And what this is it's empty except for the cities that I want labeled. So I just chose some pretty well-known places that serve as a reference for us. So instead of using the city column, I'll use our labels column. And that's looking a little bit better. But let's take a look at making it look perfect. To do that, we can expand our font properties. We can make the font a little bit smaller. Oops, my mouse button stuck there. Can make them a little bit smaller. I can change the color so it matches, or maybe make it a little bit darker even. We can add a background color. Right now the opacity is set to 0, so we won't see it until we make it a little bit darker. We can also manually move our labels so we're not covering up as much as the map. To do that, we need to have our post layer selected, which we do. Then we'll click the Map Tools tab, Edit Layer, Layer Labels. our mouse changed to let us know that we're in a label mode here. And you'll notice as I click and drag these, a leader line is automatically appearing. That can be turned off back in the properties at the bottom in the leader line section. Enable for dragged layers is checked. I think it's helpful, so I'll leave it checked. But as you can see, we can very quickly make this a lot more readable. So now that we have perfected what our map looks like in our 2D plot, let's take a look at what our map looks like in 3D. I'll turn my layer labels off by clicking this again. And now we can take a look at our 3D view by selecting our map object in the contents window. And in the properties on the view tab, I can click 3D view. By default, Surfer gives us a top-down view of our map. It looks exactly like it looked in 2D, except we now have some small yellow dots over our stars. So what we're seeing there is Surfer actually is able to give us a 3D point for each of our post map points because we have a Z associated with them. So those yellow dots are what we're seeing there. So let's make those a little bit more visible. I can do that by selecting our post layer in the contents in the vector data section. And just like the 2D plot window, we'll see the properties populated with some options. We can change our Z coordinate, the density of points we're seeing. We could make the symbols the same as the plot if we wanted, or we have some 3D symbols. For example, I like to use the cube. And then let's make them a little bit bigger here so we can see them. There we go. Just like in the 2D window, we have the opportunity to make them proportional, or if we had used that proportional setting in the 2D plot, we could make these same as plot and it would apply those same settings. The same thing goes for our color method. We could use same as plot. And they're just kind of shaded here. We'll go back to the yellow. The cubes almost cover the stars completely. If we didn't want to see the stars or the labels kind of painted on as they are, because they can look a little bit funky over the raised portions here, we can turn those off. It's referred to as a texture, so we can change textures by selecting our surface. It's just a layer listed under surfaces. And in the general tab, we'll see our textures to display. So if I uncheck our post map, we'll see that disappear, but we still get to keep our 3D points. If we wanted the post map to show and the 3D points to disappear, we can just set this column to none here, and they will disappear. Our axes, of course, also have properties. We can turn them off. Say we only wanted our Z-axis. By default, the labels are turned off, but we can turn them on by clicking Labels and Show. We have the ability to change our font size, color, everything like that if we wanted to change the formatting here, so you could immediately tell that our Z is a population. We could add a suffix here for people, which would be pretty long, or if we were working in meters, we could use an M, but I can show you what that looks like here. It's not accurate, but so we'll get rid of it. The 3D view has many, many options to explore your data and see it in a new light. All right, do we have any questions about anything we've covered so far today? All right, we do have one question. Is there a way to add titles to the axes? That seems like that would be a good solution to marking this as people rather than the suffix. And yes, that would be, and we can. Over on the General tab with our axis selected, there is a title section. So easy as that, just type that in and I pressed enter, and now we can immediately tell that we are working with population here. And I guess I'm not sure if you're wondering about the 3D view or also here we can add titles to axes as well. Same thing, select the axis that you're interested in, and then we have a title. All right, well, if anyone thinks of any questions, please feel free to send them in. We'd be happy to answer them. I will move on to our last section, which is editing and adding to the map frame. So we'll start this section by adding a scale bar. Because degrees, latitude, and longitude represent different distances depending on where they are in the world, we'll first want to change our coordinate system of the map to UTM because it's a linear unit. And this is the reason why we set a coordinate system earlier. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing for our post layer by selecting it. I'll click set. I'll choose this from my favorites and click OK. And now that I've assigned a coordinate system to both of these, I can choose a completely different coordinate system for the map object, and Surfer will automatically convert to that map object. This is also how you can have multiple layers with different coordinate systems in one map object. As long as you've told Surfer what coordinate system each layer is in and give it one coordinate system to convert all of the coordinate systems to, it'll be happy and all of your maps will overlay perfectly. So let's take a look at applying a UTM coordinate system. So of course we've selected the map so we can see its properties in the properties window. And on the coordinate system tab, we see a change button. We'll use UTM, as I said before, because it's a linear unit. UTM will be located in projected systems, UTM. But if we knew what we're looking for, you can even search. So I know Colorado is in UTM zone 13N. So if I select this, it's going to only give me the coordinate systems that have that in there. This is what we're looking for, WGS 84, UTM zone 13N. So I'll click OK. Surfer is letting us know that my beautiful custom layers are going to be lost, and that's okay. I knew that would happen. I would recommend doing that step very, very last because any changes you make to the limits of the map or coordinate system can reset all of that, and having to redo your work is something no one wants to do. So save your finessing of the labels until the last thing you do when you're making that map look perfect. So I'll click OK. You'll notice our map immediately changed. It's a little bit taller now, a little bit tighter in on the sides. That's completely expected. Lat-Long tries to make the Earth into a flat 2D surface, so it's not as true to real world distances. I'm sure we're all aware of how that works with Lat-Long compared to other coordinate systems. So this is looking good now that we are in UTM, and when I click these are still set to World Geodetic System 1984, as it should be. Now that we're working in our linear units, we can add our scale bar. So to do so, I'll select my map. And then on the Map Tools tab in the Add to Map section, I'll click Scale. Surfer added our scale bar just below here. When we select our map scale, we can see we have some properties for it as well. We have a couple options for how it looks. We can add a title. One thing I do like to use suffixes for is for the scale bar in our labels section. In the label format, can expand and use that suffix we were looking at for before. Can add a space and an M, and now we can tell that we are looking at meters. Another thing we can change is I don't really like that some of my symbols, if we see here at the very bottom, the symbols just sitting on the axis and some of them kind of overlap it a little bit. I don't really like that, so I can actually change my map limits to add a little bit more white space here. We have two ways that we can change our limits. First would be to select our map, click the Limits tab in the Properties, and just manually type in some new values here. The other way is to, again, have the map selected and click Map Tools, Set Limits. Right now, before I've clicked it, we can tell our map is selected by these green handlebars. As soon as I click Set Limits, everything gets grayed out except our map, and our handlebars turn yellow. It's the only time we recommend you use the handlebars to drag and change the map. If you're not in set limits mode, you're actually just destroying the internal scaling of your map, and the scale bar won't make any sense. It won't be accurate anymore. So only use the handlebars if you are using set limits. So I just clicked and dragged, and when I press enter on my keyboard, we can see it just moved everything out a little bit. And now when we look at the limits tab, the values have been updated for our new expanded limits, and we're no longer using the data limits. Okay. The next thing we can take a look at here is the map scale. If we were printing this out on, let's say, an 11 by 17 piece of paper, right now my map is 6 by 4, which would be a little bit small for that size of a paper. So we have some options here. For this particular instance, it makes the most sense for me to just increase my, I want to increase my X scale here to 10 inches so it'll fit nicely on an 11 by 17. Because I have XY proportional scaling checked, when I press enter, our map updates, and as does my Y scale. The scaling ratio 1:n updates. Same thing would happen if I had chosen instead to update my map units per inch. And of course, if I had a specific scaling ratio I wanted to use, I could just type that in here. So when we made our map bigger, it did not move our color scale, so I can just click and drag and move this stuff back to the outside of the map. Our scale did automatically update, so it's still accurate with our map. But some things we'll notice is now that our map is bigger, our font size didn't change, and neither did our symbols. So we can just easily correct that by selecting our post layer in the contents window. And on the symbol tab, we can just make them a little bit bigger here. And then we can do the same thing on the labels tab for our labels. Some other last minute touches, and another common question we get to our support team is, how can I add a map title? We can do that by selecting our top axis and using the title text. And there it goes. Then we can see how easy it is to quickly make a map in Surfer. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please send them in. I do see I have one. Can you overlay a base photo on the data? Yes, absolutely. You can overlay an aerial image on the photo or on the map. If you if you need to georeference it, you can do that in Surfer. Or if you don't even have an aerial image and you want one, you can download one directly through Surfer. This is another good reason to add a coordinate system to your map. Because we have a coordinate system set here, when I select my map and click Home, Add to Map, Layer, Base from Server, when I go ahead and select a server in here, Surfer already knows where I'm working. So I can, for example, we can choose this NAPE option here. And we're not in control of the servers, so sometimes they don't work. Usually this one's pretty good though. There we go. Surfer knows where we're working. This is definitely the Rockies. This is exactly where we're looking. So I'll just turn our resolution down. This is probably not going to look good for our scale, but I didn't want it to take long here. Surfer's asking if I want to change my limits. I can say no. But now it's put the image in, and please do remember I chose the lowest resolution setting in there, so the picture doesn't look good, but you can increase that all the way up and it'll look great. That was just for speed here. But if we take a look at this in our 3D view now, we have that aerial image in here as well. Oop. It's not what I wanted here. I wanted to turn off our contours and our textures to display. So there you go. And because we had that grid surface, the picture is draping over that grid. This wouldn't work if we only had the post map in there because it needs the grid surface to drape the image over. All right, do we have any other questions? All right. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. If you happen to think of anything, please shoot us an email at support@goldensoftware.com. Again, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to join us for this webinar. I hope everyone learned something new today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.